nirasya sarva sandeham akikritya sudarshanam prakashita rahasyam tam bhajami gurumishwaram itam shri radhika prana natapada sarojayo yena premanubhutyasha dattam tam shri gurum bhaje Shri Govinda Pararavinda Marupananya Vilashojitan Purna Prema Rasotsavo Jalamano Vritti Prasannananan Shajvad Krishna Katha Mahamrita Rasho Muda Kedato Bande Bhagavatani Mananulabam Murdna Nipatyakshito Namah Shri Krishna Chandraya Nirupadi Kripakrite Yashri Chaitanya Rupo Bhut Tanvan Prema Rasam Kalo Jayatu Surato Pangor Mama Mandamater Gati Matsarvasva Parambojo Radha Madana Mohano Adadanastrinam dantair yacheham puna puna Srimad Rupa Parambojo Dhuli Sam Janma Janmani Abhirapali Patiputra Kanta Dasya Bilashati Balashvavara Oh, pardon me. Shri Rupa Chintamala Sangsto. Excuse me, some in my throat. Matsvanta durdanta he churastam raganugami bhajano lasamanasanam Shiradhaya sahasara smaratam brajendhum Shri Rupa Parakamala Shita Chetasam me Chittam Satam Madhukari Atupada Padme Bhaktir ya Nikilarta Varga Janani ya Brahma Sakshat Kriter Anandatishaya Prada Vishayajat Sokyat Vimuktir Yaya Shri Radha Ramanam Param Bhujayugam Yasya Mahanashrayo Yakarya Vrajalokavat Gurutara Premnaiva Tasyai Namah Yaram ya Nikilagha Shangashamani Shrotratritim Sangata Yaswadya Nikilabda Ayasyadya Rasikai Sukabdi Janani Dhikarya Mukti Spriham Yadhyata Hridaye Vrajendra Tanuja Premamrita Syandini Sajiyad Hari Bhakta Vrinda Mohita Dhanyeha Padyavali. By the grace of Shri Kali Yuga Pavana, the Svabhajana Vibhajana, Prayojana Avatar, Prema Purushottam, Karuna Mahasagar, Shri Gauranga Mahaprabhu, and his beloved Parshad, the crest jewel of Gaudiya Vaishnava Charjas, Shri Rupa Goswami Pad. Again, today we'll continue our discussion of Padyavali. So we resume here in the Dainyokti Prakaran, or illustrations of humility, expressions of humility. So Rupa Goswami Pad has begun this section with 3 verses of his own. So today we'll discuss the third of them. In the last one we heard about this verse where he compares his mind to Gajendra and prays for the deliverance of his mind from samsara, as Gajendra was delivered from the danger of the crocodile. So here he cites another verse which we also find in the Stavamala, So we'll look at both Baladevi Pad's commentary on it, as well as how our commentator here on the Padyavali has read it. So, of similar spirit and import. So, verse 61. So next, the compiler cites a third verse of his own, in which he again, in the spirit of humility, prays to Bhagavan for deliverance. So he says, vivṛta-vividha-bādhe, bhrānti-vegād agādhe, balavati bhava-pūre, majjato me vidhure, aśaraṇa-gaṇa-bandho, kṛpā-kaumudīndo, sakṛd akṛta-vilambaṁ, dehi hastāvalambam. In the very deep and powerful flood of worldly existence, widely expansive with multifarious sufferings, I am drowning under the pull of bewilderment. O friend of the shelterless, O moon shining with the moonlight of compassion, to I, who am not far away, please once, without delay, lend your helping hand. I'll read it one more time. In the very deep and powerful flood of worldly existence, widely expansive with multifarious sufferings, I am drowning under the pull of bewilderment. O friend of the shelterless, O moon shining with the moonlight of compassion, to I, who am not far away, please once, without delay, lend your helping hand. Sri Vidyabhushan Pad comments that, quote, the flood of worldly existence, bhava-pūre, refers to the perpetual flow of transmigration in the realm of samsara. So another word for samsara is simply what we call the world. But more specifically, in Sanskrit, one word for the world is jagat, which is etymologically understood to mean gachatiti jagat, that which goes, or in other words, that which is in a constant state of motion, or through motion. The word samsara can also be etymologically derived in the same way from the sri dhatu. In either case, one might conventionally interpret that to mean motion of animated objects within this plane that are observable. But from a spiritual perspective, we can say the constant cycling or flux of jivas moving on the currents of their karma through all various, let's call it, circumstances of embodiment. In other words, all different bodies, all different circumstances, all different highs and lows and ups and downs and ins and outs that are found in all the different phases and states of life in the world. This can be considered the flood, or if you compare the world to a flood, then as everyone is driven along by the force of time, the force of their karma, like that, a flood drags everything along within it. So in that way, we see the world is like everyone's being dragged in the flood of it. So what's it like in there? We get many points of analysis. So he says, this flood is described as, quote, widely expansive with multifarious sufferings, vivṛta-vividha-bādhe, to allude to the vastness of the realm of samsara and the profusion of suffering that perpetually exists within it. As an expansive flood is inescapable and severely troublesome for those whom it engulfs, so the beginningless ignorance of Bhagavan that engulfs samsara is also inescapable for jivas by their own efforts alone, and severely troublesome for them. So when a massive flood comes through, nothing is spared. And similarly, every jiva who beginninglessly is subject to avidya, or what's called anadi avidya, then no one is spared. Everyone is driven along by the dictates of their anadi karma. And as a result, undergo all sorts of suffering in a wide, expansive realm with a wide variety of permutations. The commentator interprets the unfolding of the verse as a dialogue between the compiler, meaning Rupa Goswami Pad, and Bhagavan. When the compiler says, "I am drowning," then Bhagavan asks why this is so. And the compiler explains the cause. Quote, "I am under the pull of bewilderment, bhānti-vegād." The word bhranti, rendered here as bewilderment, is derived from the root brahm, which literally means to move or whirl about. Thus, etymologically, the word evokes the metaphoric image of a whirlpool, and Sri Vidyabhushan Pad glosses it as such. So in other words, Rupa Goswami is very carefully choosing his words here to make both the depth of meaning, rich, but also the vividness of the imagery comparable, or also impressive. So by choosing this word bhranti, he's got a perfect word which both refers to the delusion or refers to the ignorance that jivas exist within, and alludes to this condition of being driven or pulled by a current as though in a whirlpool within a flood. So by choosing this word, he gains ground, if you will, both in terms of the image that the text evokes, as well as the meaning that it conveys. So for anyone who's ever been in a whirlpool or maybe in a riptide, then they know how suddenly and shockingly fast these things can leave someone disoriented as to which way is up or down, and at a loss to do anything to rectify or to right themselves in it, but only can be carried on by the pull of it until somehow it lessens. So sometimes circumstances in samsara can be vividly felt to be just like that. And while maybe our physical well-being at times is also stable, the mind, if we conceive of all this along the lines of the previous discussion of the mind being fixated upon Bhagavan, then how fast and how easily the mind can be distracted and how far it can run on currents of thought irrelevant to what one knows to be, truth, or what one knows to be the fundamental plane of awareness that one wants to fix it in from a spiritual perspective, then also one can conceive of this pull of bewilderment, if you will, on the mental plane. The sense is thus that the bewilderment spoken of in this verse is the state of delusion jivas beset with beginningless ignorance undergo in samsara, the influence of which is akin to that of a whirlpool upon a person's being swept away in a flood. As one cannot save oneself from the pull of such a whirlpool's current, so when a jiva is under the influence of the various delusions that flourish in the mind, when one is devoid of knowledge of self, of Bhagavan, of the cause of bondage in samsara, of bhakti, and of other essential objects of knowledge, a jiva cannot act in its own interest. So as the Bhagavatam states, quote, "Having attained a human form, which has the potential for jnana, meaning knowledge based on shastra, and vijnana, direct perception of the Supreme Entity, one who is not able to understand the Atma, be it the Atma, the Self, or the Paramatma, be it Bhagavan, or more loosely the Paramatma, cannot or can never attain weal anywhere." This is a very strong statement in the Bhagavatam. In any condition of human life, no matter how well endowed one may be with resources, power, or worldly acquisitions, if you are ignorant of self, you will never find well-being. In other words, if you're not even aware of yourself, you can never act in your own best interest. And no one who has no idea what their own best interest is going to succeed in achieving it. So, it's impossible, according to this viewpoint in the Bhagavad, without atma-gyan, and more deeply speaking, without bhagavad-gyan, to ever act in the best interest of one's existential or one's essential self as an eternal jivatma. So, put another way, as Jiva Goswami puts in the first anucheda of the Priti Sandarbha, doshamulam hi jivasya doshamulam bhagavad jnana abhav eva. The fundamental deficiency and cause of all suffering for jivas in this world is the absence of knowledge of Bhagavan. That absence of knowledge is the cause of all problems, of all difficulties that are undergone. So, same point put in reverse as what is stated here in the Bhagavad. So, this, quote, pool of bewilderment, or this whirlpool that's dragging one off in the flood, is essentially that. As a person being pulled by the current of a whirlpool in a flood is in a miserable condition and can only be saved by the helping hand of someone above water, so a jiva in the whirlpool of bewilderment in samsara suffers severely and can only be saved by the grace of Bhagavan, which may come directly from Bhagavan, as it did in the case of Gajendra, or may come from Bhagavan through a sadhu, especially the sadhu who assumes the role of one's guru, as Sri Chakravarti Pad described in the aforecited passage from Madhurya Kadambini. A further implication of, quote, the pull of bewilderment, or bhrānti-vegād, being described as the cause of the compiler expressing that he feels he is drowning in the flood of samsara, is that when a jiva is free from the bewilderment of delusion, then the impression that they are helplessly drowning in misery does not remain. Just as someone situated in floodwater that is still, meaning not moving or exerting any strong pull, does not fear that they will drown. The implication is thus that when one is free from delusion, then one becomes fearless even in the midst of samsara, as was evidenced in the foresighted statement of Prahlad Maharaj from Srimad Bhagavatam. So yes, samsara is like a flood, and yes, it's full of suffering, but one is only in danger, so to speak, or feels an acute sense of needing to be removed from the exact situation one is in when one is being dragged by a whirlpool such that they feel they're going to drown. But just as, for those who've ever experienced a flood, be it in India or wherever, after the initial water sets in and is just sitting there and then day by day gradually releasing, then nobody has a problem and they're just waiting till it, goes down, and they, wade through the water or float over the water and deal as best they can with the situation, but there's no sense of them any life and death danger, so to speak. So similarly, when bhaktas exist within the realm of samsara, but they're not subject to anadi avidya, when they're not under the influence of delusion, then they're also not praying to be saved from samsara. This is a topic we discussed earlier, and which will also be discussed later in the Padyavali in a separate prakaran, how bhaktas fundamentally only desire to please Bhagavan by serving him. They don't desire their own happiness independent of the service of Bhagavan, thus they don't desire even liberation from samsara. So this is a twist, if you will, that we can also draw out from the imagery in the text. Sri Vidyabhushan Pad explains that when the compiler says, quote, I am drowning under the pull of bewilderment, so now going back to the context where the anadi avidya is in effect, the delusion is present, Bhagavan then says to the compiler, well, just wait there a minute. The suggested sense being, I will come to save you after a little while. Like, oh, okay, you need help? All right, I'll be over in a little while. Absorption in a state of acute humility, actually, I think that should be absorbed. Sorry. Absorbed in a state of acute humility, that is an acute feeling of distress, and thus feeling that his condition is too urgent to be left unattended even for a little while, the compiler replies, under the pull of this bewilderment, or this whirlpool, this flood of worldly existence has become very deep, agādhe, and powerful, balavati. No. Oh, you're in a whirlpool? Oh, no problem, I'll be over soon. No. I can't touch the bottom, and it's pulling me really fast. It's a really strong whirlpool, and it's really deep. Means I can't wait, I'm about to drown. So these additional qualifiers describing the condition that one's in add a sense of intensity and urgency to the plight that's being described. Sri Vidyabhushan Pad explains the bewilderment spoken of here to be specifically the notion of there existing the presence of essence or substance, sara, in the essenceless objects perceived throughout samsara. So we can take this delusion in general as, the influence of anadya vidya, or more pointedly, the prominent thing that perpetuates the condition is the idea that there is some real happiness in this world. There is some real substance that I want to get, and that's worth pursuing, and that will be a worthwhile, fulfilling pursuit. As long as we're thinking like that, then some type of inclination for things of this world is going to remain within the psyche. Some Vishoy Vasana is going to continue to trap us. Because as Chakravarti Pad says elsewhere, Trishnaiva hi samsara. Desire is the samsara. In other words, as long as you desire it, you remain in it. So it's the desire itself which is your samsara, or which is your samsara in the sense that it's causing it to perpetuate, and is the primary reason that you're subject to it. So that desire is based on knowledge. It's based on an attitude or a perception that there's something desirable. There's something worth getting. So that is based on what Vidyabhushan Pad is saying here, that there's some kind of sar, there's some kind of goodness, there's some kind of essence or merit to be had. So that is the bewilderment, or that is the whirlpool that's keeping you running around after all these transient things, is this idea that there is something there inside them, some essence is to be found. He further explains that the flood of samsara, thus being described as powerful, balavati, implies that it overruns and cuts away the banks of composure and the like, implying thereby that it leaves a jiva under its influence feeling desperate. So when a flood is very strong, it breaks over the dikes or dams or other things put in place to control the flow of water. So similarly, people have a certain degree of composure, of steadiness, of integrity, of all these things. But when this state of delusion becomes very pronounced, then nothing remains, and who knows what they'll do, and there's no way to rely on them. So in that sense, the flood is described as, or this pull of this current of bewilderment is described as powerful. So the commentator alternately takes it that, quote, powerful implies that the floodwater is very thick and unable to be overcome by anyone on the strength of their own faculties. So take it as the effect, take it as the consistency. In either case, the idea is that the condition is dire and one is in need of help. Thus, feeling himself to be floundering in such a condition, the compiler cries out to Sri Bhagavan, addressing him as, quote, friend of the shelterless, aśaraṇa-gaṇa-bandho, to convey that only Bhagavan can save him from such a condition. he also addresses Bhagavan as, quote, the moon shining with the moonlight of compassion, to convey that Bhagavan will feel behooved to rescue him, because Bhagavan is most certainly compassionate towards those who are in distress, and that as the moon's cooling moonlight relieves the hardship of the day's heat and causes delight for all living beings, so Bhagavan's compassion will relieve him of his suffering in samsara and delight him. So characteristics of the moon can also be understood to reflect or to remind us of certain characteristics of Bhagavan. Compassion, as we've discussed in the past, is paraduk asahisnuta, or the inability to tolerate another's suffering. In other words, if another is in a state of suffering, then oneself suffers. One is, quote, paraduka duki, or troubled by the trouble of the other, such that they feel behooved or they feel compelled to act so as to relieve that cause of the suffering in the other. So by saying you're a moon shining with the moonlight of compassion, the idea is that just as the moon shines its light everywhere, Bhagavan's compassion extends to all, and if his compassion is extended to all, then he'll feel moved to remove the suffering that the people for whom he has compassion have, because compassion is the intolerance for that suffering. So by describing himself as implying with these names that he's in need of compassion because he's shelterless, because he's in distress, then he's evoking Bhagavan's grace upon him. Sri Vidyabhushan Pad further comments that the compiler describes the flood of samsara as, quote, very deep, agādhe, to convey the urgency of his plight to Bhagavan. Quote, since the flood is very deep, my feet do not touch the ground and remain steady. I will surely drown soon. Therefore, lend your helping hand without delay, akṛta-vilambaṁ, that is, quickly. Otherwise, these two names of yours, that is, your Bhaktas' conviction that you are the friend of the shelterless and a moon that shines the moonlight of compassion, will not prove to be true. Bhaktas chant your glories throughout the three worlds for eternity and cycle after cycle of the emanation, and they're saying you're the shelter of those who have no shelter, you're full of compassion, so I have no shelter, I'm in danger, I need compassion. So if truly you are these things, then that needs to be seen, because this is the circumstance in which those things are expressed when they're indeed present in a person who is cognizant of the circumstances. So the words of your bhaktas will not prove true unless you save me. And as we hear in the Bhagavad, when Bhagavan is said to have appeared to protect Prahlad, then it is said, why did he appear? To prove the words of his bhakta to be true. That's why he appeared. So Bhagavan needs to prove the words of other bhaktas to be true, therefore he needs to appear to rescue someone in such plight as myself. This is the idea of how the poet is evoking Bhagavan's grace upon himself with these names, according to Vidyabhushan Pad. The commentator adds that the compiler describes himself as, quote, not far away, avidure, to convey that he considers himself to be present near Bhagavan, even though he is in the midst of the flood of samsara, because Bhagavan is all-pervading. So it's not that, it's a long trip and, there's a layover and there's jet lag and, going from Goloka down to samsara is too far. It's, I don't want to inconvenience you. There's no worry in that sense, because Bhagavan is all-pervading. For him to appear anywhere at any time, he doesn't need to quote-unquote move, right? Just, he can will it and he's there. So by saying, I'm not very far away, it means you're right here with me right now. Just in the matter of, an instant of intention, you could do this. This is how the commentator interprets it. The compiler also cries out, ha, because he considers that Bhagavan is nearby and thus can certainly hear him. he also does so to convey his feelings of dejection and sorrow under the circumstances. Sri Vidyabhushan Pad adds that the compiler describes himself as not far away, avidure, to indicate that there will not be even a trace of exhaustion on Bhagavan's part as a result of rescuing him, since Bhagavan can rescue him even while remaining situated in his own dwelling place. Means if you just will it, it will happen, and you can do it through a sadhu, or you can do it through whatever means you wish. You don't have to lift a finger, you don't have to go anywhere, you don't hardly have to do anything. In that way, the sense is there. He adds that the compiler's appeal to Bhagavan to do this once, sakṛd, implies that he entreats Bhagavan to deliver him from samsara, that is, from beginningless ignorance of Bhagavan and all other obstacles to absorption in service to Bhagavan, with prema, completely once and for all. So in other words, just complete the task once and fully, and then I won't have to bother you for this again, and it'll be good for you, it'll be good for me, it'll be good for all concerned. Alternately, the commentator sees it that when the compiler appeals to Bhagavan, quote, "Please lend your helping hand, dehi, hastāvalambam," after having addressed Bhagavan as, quote, "O friend of the shelterless, and O moon shining with the moonlight of compassion," someone may consider this very inappropriate and an instance of impetuousness, since simply addressing Bhagavan with these two names is itself more than sufficient to convey that he is liberally disposed to grant his shelter and compassion to someone who prays for it, and thus that he certainly will do so in response to any such prayer. So, in other words, what he's saying, this is another interpretation. I kind of prefer Baladev Vidyabhushan's, but this one also has some merit. The idea being that to address someone of great high caliber, high capability, to make a request of them and excessively spell out what needs to be done in order to accomplish the request can be perceived as unbefitting the stature of the person one is appealing to. In other words, if you were to approach the head of state of some country and say, "Please sign a bill into law that will do this and that for such and such cause. So therefore, please pick up a pen, please find the dotted line, please sign your signature here." If you were to request the person like that, it would be a bit strange, because a head of state already knows how to sign a bill into law. It's not that he doesn't know that it takes a pen, that he doesn't know where to sign his name. And if you were to ask him to pick up the pen and sign on the dotted line, it would imply as if you thought that he didn't know how to complete his job, and would be perceived as a little bit disrespectful. So the commentator here is interpreting it that someone could object to this idea of, "Oh, Bhagavan, give me your helping hand." Meaning, you don't have to ask even Bhagavan to lend his hand to you. If you just pray to him, he'll save you. It's not like you have to remind him to stick his hand out. This is the way the commentator is interpreting it, that someone could find this level of detail in the prayer excessive, considering that one is appealing to someone who's infinitely knowledgeable and capable. But to resolve this objection, the commentator states that this is true. So he says, okay, let's say it's true. Let's say this is excessive. There's no need to ask him to extend his hand. He knows perfectly well how to save you. So that this direct request to Bhagavan to lend his helping hand can be considered impetuous, given that a bhakta endowed with shraddha will consider it absolutely certain that Bhagavan will protect one who appeals to him for support. So then the question remains, well then why did he say it? If it's not that he doesn't think that, or it's not that he lacks confidence in Bhagavan's capability, it's not that he lacks confidence in Bhagavan's know-how of how to perform what needs to be done. So why would he overstate this detail, which makes him sound a bit impetuous. When one is beset with severe adversity, one does not discriminate between what is proper and improper. The implication being that this prayer of the compiler is made in the spirit of humility, and thus such a concern does not apply. In other words, if someone is drowning in the water and they're saying, throw me a life preserver, throw me a life preserver, or if they say, save me, throw me a life preserver, they're just so urgently wanting the life preserver that they're going to that level of detail, even though just saying save me is otherwise enough. And they're not necessarily discriminating on the redundancy of their speech or the concision of their words when they're in a state of acute distress. So this commentator is taking it that by adding in this phrase, just lend me your helping hand, it's like he's showing this sense of intense urgency, that his prayer is so fervent that it's as if he's reaching out saying, quick, like this. So he wants to, he goes to this extent, so to speak, to try to flush out the theme of the verse within the prakaran as conveying an intense sense of humility, specifically what you would call arti, or distress. So in that sense, it's definitely spot on in terms of thematic analysis. So that's all I have on this verse. So this completes the third of Rupa Goswami Pad's prayers to Bhagavan in the spirit of humility. So I can do one more today, but I'll just pause here in case anyone wants to discuss anything on this verse. Alright, then I'll move on. Next, the compiler cites an expression of humility arising from rejoicing at the great fortune that even the immobile entities present in Vrindavan experience, just by mere remembrance of Bhagavan Sri Krishna, and then reflecting on one's own condition devoid of that fortune. So this is a very interesting poetic expression from Sri Ishvarapuri Pad, the guru of the three worlds, the guru of Sriman Mahaprabhu, Sri Ishvarapuri Pad. So he writes the following: nṛtyan vāyu-vighūrṇitaiḥ sva-viṭapair gāyann alīnāṁ rutair muñcann aśru maranda-bindubhir alaṁ romāñcavān mākando'pi mukunda murchatitava smrityanu vrindavane bruhi prāṇa-samāna cetasi katam namapi nayatite. Shelterless. So he says, dancing with its own branches swaying in the wind, singing with the humming of bees, shedding tears with drops of nectar from its flowers, and completely horripilating with its shoots. Even this mango tree in Vrindavan, O Mukunda, swoons just by remembering you. O you who are my very prana, tell me, why does even your name not come to my heart? So, this is something one, this is a poem one can visualize. So there's pardon me, there's a mango tree in Vrindavan, and the wind or the breeze is blowing, and the branches of this tree are swaying in the wind, such that it seems like this mango tree is dancing. And there are bees humming or buzzing about around the tree, as if the tree is singing. There's this wonderful, reverberation emitting from the vicinity of the tree, as though the tree is dancing back and forth and singing out. And there are drops of nectar dripping out from the flowers on this tree. So the tree is blossoming. There's nectar dripping from all the blossoms, as if this tree is dancing, singing, and shedding tears, the way a Vaishnava might, with their hands upraised, sway back and forth and shed tears as they dance. And there are many fresh shoots on this tree, comparable to the way a Vaishnava's figure might be covered with horripilation at an ecstatic moment. So this tree in Vrindavan, this mango tree, is exhibiting these sattvika and anubhavas of tears and horripilation and singing and dancing, such that ultimately, O Mukunda, even this tree in Vrindavan swoons just by remembering you. So as a Vaishnava absorbed in bhajan might become so moved by the remembrance that they feel within their heart of Bhagavan that they swoon or they faint or fall to the ground, then it's as if this mango tree has toppled over, or it's as if this mango tree has fallen into a state of unconsciousness, and thus, is as if an insentient entity. So he addresses Krishna saying, O you who are my very prana, why does even your name not come to my heart? So the question can arise, what is the connection between this lament on the part of the bhakta about feeling a lack of remembrance of Bhagavan's name and this description of a tree in Vrindavan? So it's explained in the commentary as follows. Even this tree in Vrindavan swoons just by remembering you, suggests that when even an immobile entity like a mango tree in Vrindavan faints out of prema for Krishna, then what becomes of the other more sentient living entities there that have far more faculty for feeling, movement, and expression than a tree? So, if mango trees become overwhelmed like this by remembering Krishna, then what do the cows feel? What do the bulls feel? What do the birds feel? What do the deer feel? What do all the other forest animals feel? And what do all the Brajabasis feel? What do all the gopis feel? What does Radharani feel? Like this, there's a gradation, up, and up, how implied of what sort of intense feeling is felt just by remembering Krishna. So, not just remembering him, what about when they see him? What about when he performs a wonderful feat? What about when they're reunited with him after a long time? Then, what sort of intensity of feeling emerges? All of this is suggested by this description of what is, conventionally speaking, the lowest birth or the most, inanimate state among living entities, that of a tree. So if a tree, what is considered the least ideal birth, or the birth where you have the least faculty of action and expression, if even a tree is moved to this extent, then how much are others moved? So he wants to focus on the intensity of feeling that all of these companions of Krishna and Braj have, that the atmosphere of Braj, the bhav that pervades Braj is so intense, it's so rich, it produces such a myriad of, overwhelming feelings and expressions. So he's reflecting on that, he's bearing that in mind, and then in contrast to that, looking at the condition that he feels himself to be. But he addresses Bhagavan as, O you who are my very prana. So the commentator gives a few different interpretations. So this name can literally be understood to mean, O you who are equal to my very life. And alternately to mean, O you who are the equal, that is the dear friend of my life or my heart. Or, O you because of whom my life is good or exalted or honored. Or, you can take it as two names and say, O you who are my life, O you who are my equal, or my friend, or my very well-being. So in all cases, he's using a very intimate address of Krishna. He's speaking of Krishna the way the Brajabasis feel Krishna to be. They feel Krishna to be their equal, to be their life breath, to be the good, the well-being in their life, to be their intimate companion. So he's addressing Krishna in this very heartfelt, intimate way, in the spirit of Brajabhav. And then saying, through the expression, even your name does not come in my heart, the author expresses disconcertion, which again I'm using this word because this is a translation of one of the words that Sanatan Pad uses to gloss the idea of dainya or humility, which is the prakaran we're in right here. So the author expresses disconcertion at observing that not even the presence of Krishna's name, much less direct remembrance of Krishna, steadily remains in his heart. And through the query, why not, he expresses repentance in not having more avidly strived to fix his heart upon Sri Krishna, given that he cherishes Sri Krishna as his very life, and wants nothing more than to be absorbed in bhakti to him. In this way, he conveys that he feels his life to be void, without it being centered upon and filled with absorption in Sri Krishna. So the commentator takes the purport as this: without your coming into my heart, my life shall not continue. So you are my life, and yet even your name is not coming in my heart. So how will I live? If you are my prana, and you're not in my heart, not even your name is in my heart, then how will this body continue? How will this person who's dependent upon prana go on? This is what he wants to convey. So he wants to both convey the intensity of his sense of dependence and connection to Krishna, as well as his state of distress or repentance at feeling Krishna's absence, or in finding that the name of Krishna is not naturally remaining within his present awareness. And the kaimutyanai, or the implication being that to both have the presence of Krishna's name in one's mind, as well as a present sense of awareness of Krishna. In other words, as opposed to absent-mindedly repeating the name, or as today a few fellows were joking, saying, "Oh, I couldn't hear so well in the class today. The sadhu next to me was doing too much fixed curry." Means some Vaishnavas have a habit of chanting japa in the middle of the class, and so sometimes when they do it quickly, but they try to make it not too loud to disturb others, but in doing so, it creates this sound like this Snickers sound again and again. So sometimes someone, I didn't get to hear the class so well, there was too much fisk next to me going on. So in that sense, if someone is maybe hearing the class, or maybe, rattling off some whispered mantras so fast that they don't even sound like the name of Krishna, they just sound like something like this, then there might be the presence of the name in the mind, but there isn't really, so to speak, remembrance of Krishna as such. So the sense here is that he wants both the presence of the name as well as that direct cognition, or that direct presence of mind that he's thinking of Krishna right now. His mind is fixed upon him. His mind is absorbed in him. That's what he cherishes. That's what he wants. But to say that, what to speak of even that direct awareness, not even some lack of direct awareness, but at least the name is there. Not even that is there. Why not? how is my mind still so conditioned by all varieties of, vishoy vasana, all these inclinations towards all these features of the sensory realm, that not even Krishna's name remains steadily within my heart and mind? What a condition I'm in. What a lamentable state. How should I live on like this? So, the commentator also adds another layer of meaning, or adds another kind of angle that this can be read at as follows. The commentator also notes that the author's description of the branches and so forth of the mango tree can be understood as an instance of the figure of speech known as vyaja, and that this figure of speech is employed for the purpose of concealing his own feelings from the public. So my 2 cents is that the commentator is probably adding this other layer of interpretation because this is a verse of Isharapuri. So Isharapuri Pad is supremely worshipful for us, being the guru of Sriman Mahaprabhu. So when Isharapuri is making this type of statement in humility, then one may still want to think, or may want to bear in mind this idea that Isharapuri is not actually lacking in this respect, but somehow he's feeling a lack even though there isn't actually a lack. So how can we understand that really he's not lacking, but yet he's saying that, or he's expressing this lack? So the commentator is solving that quote-unquote problem, if you will, by interpreting this statement as an instance of an ornament of speech, or a figure of speech known as vyaja. So this is a figure of speech is employed for the purpose of can we please shut the door if you need to have a conversation? For the purpose of concealing his own feelings from the public. So he may like to write in such a way to both convey what his heart, but at the same time also not do so ostensibly or obviously. So how is that done? Vyaja is a form of dissimulation wherein the effects of one's feelings are dissembled by attributing them to a cause other than their actual one. In this case, the commentator suggests that the author himself is actually the one singing, dancing, shedding tears, and haripulating as a result of being absorbed in thought of Sri Krishna in Vrindavan. Yet out of his intense desire to relish such absorption in bhakti to Krishna evermore, he feels himself to be devoid of any such absorption at all, and projects the presence of that state of absorption he feels ever-increasing longing for onto others he observes, such as the mango tree he may have been sitting under while he became absorbed in such longing. Perceiving one's own prema, which can give rise to expressions of humility like the one found in the verse, in others, is said to be a characteristic of the highest class of bhaktas, or uttam bhagavatas, described in Srimad Bhagavatam. So sarva bhusheshu ya pashyat bhagavat bhavamatmanaha esha bhagavatottama. So there are many different interpretations of this verse, but one of them is bhagavat bhavam can be interpreted to mean bhava or prema for Bhagavan, and atmana can mean one's own. So one's own bhava for Bhagavan, one's own prema for Bhagavan, sarva bhuteshu, in all living beings, pashyat, one who can see, or one who will see their own bhava for Bhagavan in all other living beings, esha bhagavatottama. That person is a uttam bhagavat, or is, the highest class of bhakta. This is one interpretation of that verse. So in Isharapuripad is certainly to be regarded as an uttam bhagavat, so he may very well have such a characteristic, and therefore his statement here could also be interpreted in that way, that he is actually the one who has this prem that's causing these anubhavas and causing these sattvic bhavas, but he's speaking about that, or he's expressing the intensity of blessedness, if you will, that he feels in prema for Krishna by virtue of the name of Krishna, by virtue of the grace of Krishna, but he's speaking of it as though it's posited or existing in this mango tree rather than in himself. So he's not the only one who might speak this way, because it can be observed, for example, in the Braja Gopis, who muse during the day while they remain in the village separated from Krishna in the forest, as follows. So this is a statement in the Yugal Gita. It says, when Sri Krishna calls the cows roaming on the hillside from within the forest with his flute. So in other words, when the gopis are in the village, they're separated from Krishna, but all day their minds are constantly full of thought of Krishna. So as the poet is saying, not even your name is coming in my mind, let alone remembrance of you. Then the Bhagavatam depicts how the gopis can't stop thinking about Krishna all day when he's away in the village. They're always singing of him. They're always being moved to the state of intense emotion by the effect of their bhav, which is that their mind can't go anywhere else, that they're full of this awareness of him. So when they're so full of that awareness, then they perceive the presence of that bhav, or perceive the presence of that prema for Krishna, even in the other features of the environment that they're in. So they therefore say the following. When Krishna calls the cows roaming on the hillside from within the forest with his flute, the forest creepers and trees, abounding with fruits and flowers, their branches bowed under the weight thereof, and their bodies delighted or haripilating with prem, shower streams of nectar, as though manifesting Vishnu in their hearts. So they're saying, oh look, these trees are swaying back and forth, and it's like all these shoots, it's like they're haripilating, there's nectar pouring from their blossoms, it's like they're shedding tears, it's like Vishnu appeared in the heart of these trees, and now they're showering all this nectar, and they're bursting forth with all these fruits and flowers. They're seeing as if these trees are overwhelmed with bhav. Actually, they're overwhelmed with bhav, and therefore they're seeing the trees to be like that. So the commentator is saying that we can interpret the author's statement about this mango tree as actually a positing or a description that's an effect of the intensity of his own prem, even though this is a statement in the Prakaran about humility, where the principal spirit of the verse is the author expressing a want of prema, even a want of remembrance of Krishna, even a want of the presence of Bhagavan's name in his mind, out of or motivated by a sense of humility, or a sense of heartache, a sense of disconcertion at being yet to be successful in one's approach to bhakti, or feeling a lack of bhakti within oneself. So this is our fourth statement expressive of humility. So I'll conclude there for today. If anyone has any comment, question, correction, or otherwise on these two verses, please feel free to share.
I may have a question or
Okay.
a comment, if possible. Just like acharyas speak of unattainment of. Sorry, I'm just trying to formulate the question, if you don't mind, based on what you said. The acharyas, they speak of unattainment of happiness in the face of not understanding your own position as jivatma or atma. and so they look on the happiness of jiva from the absolute point of view, meaning that unless you realize that you're Krishna Das, and your place is right there in service of Bhagavan, then everything you do doesn't fulfill you. From absolute point of view, it's perfect. However, from the point of view of conditioned soul, there are even Vedas also explain a different section of Vedas that lead for a section karma-kanda. So they try to make jiva happy despite of condition, saying that actually this material world, although it's temporary, although it's full of suffering, yet there's a way of mitigating that suffering by living pious life, or being informed, self-controls, whatnot. There are many methods, by coaching, whatever, understanding, where your suffering comes from, materially speaking, and solving that problem, and live fulfilled life as a conditioned soul. So the existence of happiness for jiva means conditioned soul, exists, and it's not wrong to say that you can be happy living in this material world, under, let's say, the Varnashama system. That's possible. However, from point of view of Gaudiya Vaishnavas or self-realized souls, that's not happiness. So there are 2 point of views saying contradicting each other, actually, I would say. And so it's a question basically of standing or choosing the path by which we to provide happiness and remove our sufferings. It's not really, you can say yes, from absolute point of view, yes, that's the path of bhakti is the highest, and yet there is a way of not being on other path, still maintaining happiness. What you would say on that? I'm curious.
Well, one thing we can say is that there are different definitions of happiness at play, and also different standards of acceptance, if you will. In other words, if you take the inside the samsara scope of happiness, then we have this word called sukh, or ananda or whatever, and people think that they experience it regularly or on a daily basis or whatever. And we have the idea that it comes and goes, it's mixed with suffering. So there's this idea that it's there, but it's not pure, or it's not complete. So from the Bhagavat's perspective, or the Paramahamsa Samhita perspective of seeking only sukha, which is undiluted, non-transient, having no unnecessary or unpleasant side effect, all of these sides, it's, in other words, there's not a denial that there's, transitory experiences of happiness within conditioned life, but it's basically the standard that you're willing to accept and say, should I just learn to live with happiness that's always mixed with some impermanence and some drawback and some future consequence, and just not expect more than that? Like Buddhist, Stoic, many different ancient thinkers, they went in this direction with the problem, so to speak, that if we just don't aim and expect too much, we can learn to be at peace with what we have, and that acceptance, that peace, is the best thing we can get, and that's the whole story. Or you have the transcendentalist perspective, which says, no, there's gotta be some pure, eternal, undiluted, infinitely more wonderful super happiness. And we want only that. And we're not going to settle for any of this, mixed or impermanent or defective variety. So that is definitely a watershed, if you will, or a very significant choice that an individual makes about what they want to pursue and what they want to hold true, if you will, because it fundamentally requires a faith. It requires a certain, at least, ability to hold confidence in the potential of the thing to exist during the process of seeking to reach it and experience it. So, how and when one decides that it's worthwhile to believe in the existence of this transcendental ideal and pursue that rather than just cultivate, gratitude and contentment with conventional circumstances, then we can say that it's not entirely incompatible. In other words, one can, in the pursuit of transcendence, also foster the virtue of contentment with one's immediate circumstances, with the ups and downs of daily life. It's not that you can't do one or the other. They are compatible to a certain extent, but, the idea is that there is fundamentally an unfulfilled desire in the mind of every transcendentalist, because they're desiring something that is, that they've yet to experience and yet to attain. And in the case of Bhaktas, something that they can't even attain by their own means. They're intensely desiring something that they're dependent on another to ever receive. So from a conventional analysis, that's not a good way to seek happiness, because you're externalizing the agency and the causation of your happiness to someone else. And the more that you can internalize it into the way that you adjust to your circumstances, the more immediate control and effect you might be able to experience over the relative peace of mind that you have. That would be, the worldly critique of the transcendentalist approach. But the transcendentalist will say the risk is well worth it, and the whole problem is to think and to give up on the potential for the higher thing, and that's actually the ultimate self-betrayal, or the ultimate cheating of oneself, is to just never have been willing to accept that there's a greater thing valuable for you. It's like, living in some dingy, unpleasant place, and then right over the hill there's a paradise, and you just never had the will to just walk over the hill to live in paradise ever after, and you spent your whole life suffering in some unpleasant area. It's who can you blame for that? It's just the fact that you weren't willing to just try enough to go see what else was there. So this is a tension, that's played out for thousands of years across world cultures, and we see how, different cultures have leaned more into the immediate versus the transcendent, if you will. And, everyone has their individual findings.
Yeah. I think, thank you for that insight. I think the key point of difference is that why transcendental happiness is higher than the samsara happiness is that the fear of death. That you may be finding your happiness in some world, make all the arrangements, and it's possible. Yet there is an element of death, passing, that actually scares everyone. And so, in order to be happy in the fear of death, you would have to make a lot of arrangements in this life before you expire, to actually make abundance of happiness for yourself. It's supposed to be so surcharged that before you expire. Whereas in transcendentalist approach is that you want to transgress that fear, and the sense of eternity is the sense of happiness, actually. that you search happiness in eternity, so basically you want to skip the fear of death. I mean, it's not the objective, but the happiness is higher because you are not afraid of death. And actually, this is exactly what I was saying earlier, that the Vaishnava is not afraid of death, and that's the sign of transcendence. He may not be happy, but he's not happy yet, but he's not in fear of death, which is a great achievement, actually, comparing to people who are samsarics, right? So I want to just add that to the picture.
Thank you.
Is it coherent?
Yeah.
Is it coherent what I'm saying?
Sure. I mean, definitely the relief from the sense of absolute loss that death appears to be in the eyes of many is a very tangible benefit to having a spiritual perspective on life from a criterion of peace of mind, or from a criterion of being able to see meaning within the challenges and the unfolding of one's life.
Can we say that Sharanagati is the turning point of actually standing on the feet of happiness, on the head of it? But,
sure, let's say that.
Yeah.
When Bhagavan is happiness, so to speak, taking shelter in him, coming in connection with him is the road to happiness, is connection with happiness. Yes.
Yes, it's really rest from suffering, really. Like if you can depend on the Lord, you really feel He's there and you depend on Him, then, I mean, it's massive relief.
Indeed.
Thank you.
The other day we were hearing that verse from Ananda Vrindavan Champu. Krishna is called by Kavi Karnapur Murtananda, or embodied Ananda. So to take shelter in, embodied Ananda, or to remember embodied Ananda, brings you in connection with Ananda, doesn't it? All right, well, we'll conclude here for today, and in our next session, we'll go further into this Dainyokti Prakaran here in Padyavali. Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namo. Jai Shri Guru, Jai Shri Gaur, Jai Jai Shri Shri Radhe.
Jai Shri
Shyam.
Radhe.
Here it does. Thank you.